I am also the nephew of W. Joel Skousen, who many of you may know. He was a great patriot, and I can remember as early as 17 years old where Cleon set me on the pattern, reading his fine book, The Naked Communist, to the kinds of inside betrayal that was going on within our own government. And the only criticism that I learned later on when I was chairman of the Conservative National Committee in Washington, D.C. during the Reagan administration is that most of the people in the Roosevelt and Truman administration that were communists were not put there by communists. They were put there by globalists. And the globalists, like Alger Hiss, who did join the Communist Party, did so that the communists wouldn't think twice about why he was helping them. It's the same thing that Henry Kissinger did in East Germany when he was a young man, went and joined the Communist Party. So that when he ended up betraying us betraying South Vietnam at the Paris peace talks and giving China a seat in the Security Council and betraying Taiwan, kicking them out of the United Nations, the communists didn't think anything of it. Kissinger's one of us. But he isn't. He's a globalist. And what people are falling in for this grand deception, even today, there's too many people in the conservative movement that think that Joe Biden is a puppet of the Chinese Communist Party because he's accepted money through Hunter and other things. But it's not true. He's a pure puppet of the globalist. Now, the globalists don't care a whit if any of their leaders take money from the Communist Party because they like the communists to think that they control Joe Biden, but they don't. And so stop following the mantra that we've got a bunch of communists in our government. They are globalists, and they're using communism. Let's look at George Soros, one of the big top financiers in the globalist movement. Why is he financing communists and BLM and Antifa movements? Because the globalists use communism to break down the social order so that they can come in the chaos that ensues and have their solution accepted. It's a lesser solution. It's a less radical solution than communism. That's been their mantra ever since they brought the communists to power in Russia, $20 million in gold bullion by Jacob Schiff that went into the communists, $20 million in gold bullion from the British Anglo establishment to the communists. That's why they betrayed Chiang Kai-shek and Red China. And Cleon does an excellent job in documenting that betrayal by the various powers that be within the Roosevelt and Truman administration. George Catlett Marshall was a globalist. And to a certain extent, so was Eisenhower. Now, Eisenhower is revered by all of you as a great Republican president. But he's guilty of some real war crimes. General Eisenhower is the one that mandated and issued the orders which required that all of the Eastern Europeans in Europe be forcibly repatriated to Russia. He also denied food and tents and coats and in the dead of winter to German prisoners and was responsible for killing 20,000 German prisoners of war. So even though President Ezra Taft Benson, who knew about conspiracy and communism, didn't see this, and he didn't see it at all because it was kept hidden for many, many years. But the greatest crime of George Catlett Marshall and Dwight D. Eisenhower was that they left 20 to 30,000 American and British soldiers who had been liberated in prison camps by the Russians, and the Russians kept them as hostages to make sure that Eisenhower let all of the Europeans, or forced all of the Europeans, to be repatriated to Russia, where they went immediately into gulags and slave labor camps. And then after the U.S. had complied with all of that, and a lot of people committed suicide so they didn't have to go back to Russia. And a lot of these people had never lived under communism in Russia. In fact, there was an entire army of white Russians who had fought and lost because the U.S. and Britain pulled the military support out of the white Russian armies, and the British betrayed them to Stalin. They came in with trucks and loaded up this entire army who fought for the Germans because they were trying to get rid of Soviet communism, loaded them into trucks and told them they were taking them to rest and relaxation camps, and then drove them into the Russian side of the border and betrayed them. Now, you never hear about these things because history is covered up. It's part of the conspiracy of the historians on the left, and a lot of this is because, historians are kind of yes men. They're yes men to the education establishment. They know that if they take the position that it's either an anti-Soviet or in any way anti-Chinese, etc., they'll be blackballed from the education establishment. So it's been very, very evil. There's other books that tell you the excruciating information about some of these betrayals, and I'll give you a couple of references. And it does you good to read these books, even though they're dated now, because these two books that I'm going to tell you about give you firsthand experiences from people who had dealings with the State Department, with the President of the United States, and with the people on the second floor of the State Department that betrayed anti-communists within Cuba and Nicaragua. The Cuban story is best told by a book called Dagger in the Heart by Mario Lasso. Now, Mario Lasso was an English-speaking attorney, dual citizen, U.S., Cuban, who worked for and did most of the legal work for the Batista government. And so he had access to all of the letters and threats and other things that cut off aid to Batista, and documented as well this massive propaganda campaign by the New York Times. Herbert Matthews in particular was a real evil person, and this is beyond most of your times. And then it's just tragic to see. And one of the most interesting things that he covers in his book, he tells you the real story of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the aftermath of it. In your history, you're told that we won the Cuban Missile Crisis. We got them to take the missiles out. But what they don't tell you, and what Lasso does tell you, is that we gave up all of our intermediate ballistic missiles aimed at Russia in the country of Turkey in order to get a few puny Russian missiles out of Cuba, of which we were never allowed to inspect, so we really never know if they got taken out. But we also, and President Kennedy made the grave error of promising Khrushchev that he would never, ever destabilize or invade Cuba. So he gave Cuba a free hand to become a nest of subversion all throughout Latin America. So we didn't win the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a real betrayal. And that leads us to Nicaragua, because Nicaragua was the first country that was the attack from the Cuban, with Soviet arms and Cuban training, to try to undermine Anastasio Somoza. General Somoza was the elected president of Nicaragua. He was a very fine person. But you wouldn't know that from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the other mainstream media. They literally put lie after lie and crucified, this man. The book is called Nicaragua Betrayed by Anastasio Somoza. Nicaragua Betrayed. It's worthy of having in your library. It's still available on Amazon as a used book. I just picked up an additional copy myself. And even though I read it years ago, it's heart-wrenching because Somoza documented every letter, every communication with the State Department, with even Jimmy Carter, and with ambassadors and everyone, and documented every single betrayal. And it's just heart-rending because it's blatant. It's blatant supporting communism. Now, but they weren't communists. Most of these people were globalists.